The Marching Roundtable is proud to be an official media partner of Drum Corps International.
Thanks for coming to the Marching Roundtable YouTube channel, sharing great information to help you succeed in all the marching arts. While you're here, we hope you'll subscribe. Hi, this is Tim Hinton, the Beast of the Marching Arts and the host of the Marching Roundtable podcast. On this series, we talk with a private lesson teacher and performer for each instrument to tell you what you need to know to be more effective in working with those students. We hope you enjoy the series.
I feel like trumpet is challenging. It's always has been, and from what I've seen in my own experience teaching band and teaching sectionals and even teaching drum corps, is that trumpet is finicky, and especially when you have a section of trumpets that all need to be able to deliver, together as a group. I mean, if you're thinking about your high school marching band trumpet section or even a college section, getting the trumpets to work well together as players and have a unified understanding of what healthy trumpet playing is, I feel like that can be more challenging than a unified tuba section or a unified tenor saxophone section. Just by the nature of the instrument and the way that it's written for, trumpet is not at all something that you can hide from. So I think it's important as a teacher to, of course, make sure that you reinforce these ideas of playing with healthy technique and playing responsibly, but also making sure that you empower them to really play. I think it's very easy to hear an incorrect note or something that's not how you want it as a director and just give the hand, the dreaded hand of silence. Although I think some trombones think of getting the hand as a badge of honor. Maybe some trumpets too, but
that might be their reputation.
Yeah, that might be their reputation. Being just instantly saying trumpets, that wasn't right, stop, may not be the best option. Maybe being able to give a little bit more specific feedback of, trumpets, I don't feel like that was the right color for this moment.
This podcast is sponsored by FJM, Fred J. Miller Incorporated, found at fjminc.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Marching Roundtable. This is Tim Hinton, the Beast of the Marching Arts, and we are talking about trumpet today. And I have a real ringer with us. Ben Gunnarson is here. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for being here to be our trumpet guru for this conversation. And you've been playing trumpet a long time. If you'd introduce yourself, please.
Yes, it's getting longer and longer every year. I played trumpet all the way through school and college and everything, and now I'm a professional trumpet player. I had spent a lot of time in Los Angeles playing at Disneyland, doing a lot of freelancing, playing in orchestras, and just recently moved out to Washington, D.C. to start my new job with the President's Own United States Marine Band.
So congratulations. How exciting, that new adventure. I would assume performing at Disneyland was a lot of fun, and I would talk to you about that for an hour, but that's not why we're here. But all of this sounds great. Congratulations on this new position, and what a great adventure that's going to be. So here's our setup. We're imagining that there's a director or an instructor standing in front of an ensemble. Sitting in that ensemble are a bunch of kids with trumpets, and I'm like, okay, well, as a trumpet player, what do you want me to know to be able to work with those students in the most effective way? So what would be the first thing that you would say?
So the first thing I would say is that trumpet playing is hard. And what I mean by that is, especially for if you're comparing trumpet against some of the other instruments in a band, unlike a woodwind instrument or a saxophone or something like that, where you can just kind of honk away and you'll get a sound, trumpet and the other brass instruments as well involve the human body to be part of the instrument. So what I mean by that is that your lips vibrating is just as much a part of the instrument as your valve buttons or your tuning slide or your bell. You participating in making the sound with a piece of your body is challenging to a degree that I think some people don't realize. And so when you have a student or even a professional or a colleague that hasn't taken the time to study that and learn about how that vibration works and how to make that work well with your instrument, it can really set you back.
Okay, so is that something then that you think that an instructor standing in front of the students, they need to be able to explain that somehow, or how do we get students to be comfortable with this concept? Because it also seems like it could paralyze me if I'm thinking too much about what's going on, right?
Totally. And I don't think at all that it's just a one-trick pony solution. I think that it's definitely a multifaceted approach. And I know that there's probably people out there that are like, oh, darn, there's no just secret to get my trumpet players to play well. Believe me, if I knew what that was, I would have used it a long time ago on myself. But there's a lot of things that you can do. I think, if you as a director are not maybe a brass player and that's very much a foreign world to you, one thing that you can do really heavily is lean on any professionals in your area to maybe come in and do a master class and talk about it with your brass students or your trumpet students. You can also, use recordings using different video clips or audio clips, developing sort of a sonic idea of what great brass playing should be. Those are two options right off the bat that you can make a lot of difference and get a lot of gears turning in the student's head without you needing to be a brass instrument expert. I definitely think those are some easy places to start.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. So the idea that I'm using a part of my body, then buzzing my lips, and that I'm sort of so much a part of the instrument, do you feel like this is something that brass players have to get past? That is sort of one of their challenges?
That's a great question. I think yes, but I should put that in quotation marks. I think there are a very small number of very lucky children that get put on trumpet or French horn or something like that and naturally just understand or get lucky in that the way that they set themselves up the first time just so happens to be very good. I do think those people exist. I would consider that sort of in the unicorn category, because I think in the real world, the reality is that 95% of students don't come up that way through their instrument learning process. I think that most students have sort of a vague idea of what's going on. Maybe they see their friend who just gets it, and maybe copy them a little bit. I think a lot of times young students will do just maybe call and response sort of copying of what are they seeing, what are they hearing, and trying to do that rather than maybe listen to their teacher. But that will only get you so far. I think that if we can get just a little bit of a firmer push into real pedagogy and technique about how to make healthy sounds, how to make a great embouchure, how to get that vibration going in a healthy way, if we can just get a little extra push there from an early age, that pays exponential dividends down the road because your students know what they're trying to do. They're not guessing. They're not just trying to copy something from Instagram or TikTok. They're basing what they're trying in a little bit more fact.
Okay, that's a great point. So this is really about starting the students with the right concepts, the right information, so that they can hopefully get past some of that early on in the process.
Yeah. And to that point, I don't think it necessarily has to be right at the beginning. I mean, optimally, yes, all this gets taught as early and as quickly as it can. But, I mean, if you've got an 11th grader who's transferring in from another school that's never touched trumpet technique or sound production in a real way before, I wouldn't fret. Everybody can learn this stuff. I know for me, even as a professional, I didn't learn a lot of this stuff till after I got out of college. The I guess ability to keep learning, especially as a brass player, but honestly as any sort of musician, that ability to keep learning lasts for your whole life. And so, if you don't catch them at 6th grade, talking about embouchure placement and shape and engagement and all those sort of things, it's not the end of the world. In a perfect world, yes, that's where you'd catch all of it. And you'd manage to keep them interested at the same time without boring them to death. But I think in the broad scheme, as long as it gets addressed, no matter what age group you're talking to, it's going to make a difference.
Okay, great. So that's a good point to start with. What's the next thing that you would want me to know?
Gosh, I wrote down a list and I'm trying to think. There's a lot of things that are helpful. I think just like any other instrument, there are common either predispositions or guesses that a student may have about how style works for their specific instrument. Maybe what they think is correct, either with how to interpret, a phrase, whether that's maybe how to play a chorale in a very, I guess, appropriate way, or how to do a march, or how to play a fanfare, or how to play quietly. There may be preconceptions about how that's supposed to go. Not to go too far back into our previous conversation, but talking about concept of sound. What kind of a sound do you want to play with in a band versus an orchestra versus a jazz band versus a brass quintet? The ability to start really thinking about those things and how do you play specifically for the occasion, I think is really important. And the earlier that can happen, I think it does two things. One, it's going to make the students better. It's going to make them, I guess, more responsible musicians and be able to really recall on those abilities for whatever different kinds of music you're going to play. But I also think it's going to be more fun for the student. The student, especially if they're an eager student or somebody that's really invested in band, giving them more demand and saying, hey, no, I like that you're playing this march, but can you play this like a march, instead of like you did, last period in jazz band. That extra challenge may be a great thing to help push those students on their instrument, but also keep them invested and keep them interested.
Yeah, I love this idea of playing for the occasion. That's such a great way to say that, because you're right. There are all kinds of different, not only styles of playing and interpretation of music, but clearly even sounds, tone, colors, and things that you can adjust based on where you are and what you're doing. So that's a really interesting concept to have sort of in your pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay, good. What other tips do you have?
The thing that I think helps, and I know that this happens everywhere, but I'm going to use this as an example. The state of Texas, as we all know, there's a lot of great band happening in the state of Texas, a lot of great educating. And one very common theme among a lot of different schools, especially at the beginner level. So we're talking middle school, 6th grade beginning band, 5th grade beginning band, is the idea of having a homogeneous class of just one instrument. So, instead of just starting all your beginners of a band in band rehearsal, maybe there's better time spent having the trumpets and horns go and just work with trumpets and horns for a while, and have the low brass go and have all the saxophones go and that sort of thing. That's more of a broader spectrum idea, and that's not specific to just trumpets. However, I do think that's very helpful for trumpets, especially if you can get them in with, a local college student or a local professor or a local trumpet teacher that, and maybe it's not a weekly thing. I know in a lot of places in Texas, it's a daily thing, but, wherever you have a program, at some point, if you can get those brass players, those trumpet players into a space where they can just all talk about trumpet at the same time with somebody that knows what they're doing, that's extremely helpful because, in rehearsal, there's not a lot of time for that band director from the podium to just stop class and talk about embouchure or talk about double tonguing with just the trumpets. There's so limited time for that kind of instruction in rehearsal time. The ability to even have one after school rehearsal or trumpet sectional, a month or something like that is a great start to be able to get those students in a place where they're focusing a lot more on how they play their instrument not just on the music that's in front of them.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for any instrument, but I do feel like it's very important to separate those out, have those, like you said, bring somebody in this is their instrument and they can spend that special time. I think that's a really great advice. Is that especially important for trumpet as opposed to other brass instruments? Is there anything about trumpet in particular that you feel like they need that me time?
I may be just talking from my personal experience, but like I said at the very beginning of today, I feel like trumpet is challenging. It's always has been, and from what I've seen in my own experience teaching band and teaching sectionals and even teaching drum corps, is that trumpet is finicky, and especially when you have a section of trumpets that all need to be able to deliver together as a group. I mean, if you're thinking about your high school marching band trumpet section or even a college section, getting the trumpets to work well together as players and have a unified understanding of what healthy trumpet playing is, I feel like that can be more challenging than a unified tuba section or a unified tenor saxophone section. I don't want to negate the fact that time together would still be helpful for those other groups too. I think everybody would benefit from it. But if you'd ask me to say, all right, which sections could use the most me time, together working with a specialist, I would absolutely put the trumpets very close, if not at the top of that list.
Really? Okay, this is really interesting. Well, I might ask you to dive into that just a little bit more because I think you're probably right, but I think that generals, people on the street in the world of band would probably not think that. Okay, I think they would probably think, like bassoon is like this weird thing that people don't know much about, or this other thing over here. But trumpet seems like the very common instrument. But you, of course, are a trumpet player. That's why I'm talking to you today. You understand. You said it's finicky. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, and this was actually another point that I wanted to get to. In talking about a trumpet section, you've got, let's take an orchestra, for example, maybe your high school orchestra or an honor orchestra. You've got a principal trumpet, you've got a second trumpet, third trumpet, and maybe a fourth trumpet. And, I know it's very different than orchestra, but we could also apply that to a jazz band. In reality, each one of those chairs actually has a very specific job. I think sometimes we get maybe this false sense of, first trumpet is where the best trumpet players go and fourth trumpet's where the worst trumpet players go. And it just gets progressively easier as you go down. That might be true for beginning band music. But when you get into more advanced music, common high school playing or orchestra playing or anything in the professional world, all of the parts need to be played very well because the way they're written is very specific and each one has a specific job. So, if I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to put together, I'm going to combine our wind section from the band and our high school orchestra together, and we're going to do a big, play the Nutcracker for Christmas. How do I make that sound good? Well, you're going to need all 3 or 4 of those trumpet players to know how to ace their job. The principal is going to need to lead the whole brass section. The second trumpet is going to need to be laser focused on lining up with the principal trumpet and matching what they do and being able to provide this really steady base of sound for the principal trumpet to just lay on top of. The third trumpet player is going to need to be able to accurately add to that harmony. They're going to need to know how to tune. They're also going to need to be able to blend in the sound into the sound of the first top 2 trumpets and know how all of that harmony work goes on. And a lot of times the fourth trumpet player will have their own set of responsibilities. Sometimes they'll play the lowest harmony part, but some other times they'll play a completely separate solo apart from the other 3 trumpet players, and they need to know how to do that. The point I'm trying to make is that all 4 trumpet parts need to be, very paid attention to, put a lot of detail into how it's done, and you really need excellence on all 4 of those parts. And so if I'm thinking about, how important is it to have all my trumpets be able to play well, if you're trying to make your ensemble sound really incredible or do some very fine detailed work, just one trumpet is really going to start sinking you. Trumpet, I like to say a lot, playing trumpet is very live by the sword, die by the sword. It's not at all for the faint of heart. I think trumpet is, and of course we earn a little bit of reputation, I guess, amongst the rest of the band and orchestra members for sometimes being having big heads or having a little bit of ego. And okay, I think some of that can be true, unfortunately, but hopefully not when you're working in a professional way. I do think, though, that your trumpet players need to be confident in what they're doing and the nature of being a trumpet. It's an instrument that was created to call people to war. It's not for the light of heart. It's not something that you can sneak by in the shadows, even if you're on third or fourth part. It's something where everybody needs to be able to contribute equally for that section sound to really come across well. And so I think it's really important, even though it's a difficult instrument to get things working on, to make sure that everybody there, whether as a musician they're really far along or not, hopefully as a technical trumpet player, they can all be strong.
This is really interesting. I love the way you just presented that, Ben, because I feel like trumpet players do have a reputation for a little bit of that ego, but your point is well taken. There's a reason perhaps for this, because they are leading the band, they're leading the charge. They do have a lot of responsibility, and it's hard to hide when you're playing a trumpet. Like it's high, it's loud, there it is. You know what I mean? So, I'm a horn player, so I'm all about making that lush middle sound and bringing everything together. And, like that's my job. And I love having that job as a horn player, but that's not the trumpet player's job typically. So you're right. There is a little bit of a liability there, not for the faint of heart. It's a very interesting way to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, that I'm not giving permission for trumpet players out there to have an ego. No, you need to be a professional. You need to be part of the team just like anybody else. But when it's time to play, there's no option other than just wearing your heart on your sleeve. You got to play, even if it's, and to your point, I mean, we do get an ego or a perception of, always high, always loud, always blah, That's oftentimes how composers will include trumpets in their music. But to the same token, quiet trumpet playing, like playing a Sibelius symphony or playing a very, very soft chorus in a Thad Jones jazz tune, or chamber music playing where you're so reliant on your dynamic ability to change dynamics and vary from low to high. Even soft trumpet playing it can be challenging. I think it's honestly harder to play quiet than it is loud, which is maybe why you don't often hear a lot of quiet trumpet playing. But to play quietly requires a lot of the same skills, but to a higher degree, I think, than loud playing. And if I'm in a Sibelius symphony playing my 32 count whole note and I chip it, even if I'm at pianissimo, the whole audience is going to hear it, and it's very obvious. It is not, a string player being a quarter tone off. That might be able to hide a little bit, especially when you're one of 25. But just by the nature of the instrument and the way that it's written for, trumpet is not at all something that you can hide from. So I think it's important as a teacher to, of course, make sure that you reinforce these ideas of playing with healthy technique and playing responsibly, but also making sure that you empower them to really play. I think it's very easy to hear an incorrect note or something that's not how you want it as a director and just give the hand, the dreaded hand of silence. Although I think some trombones think of getting the hand as a badge of honor. Maybe some trumpets too, but
that might be their reputation.
Yeah, that might be their reputation. Being just instantly saying trumpets, that wasn't right, stop, may not be the best option. Maybe being able to give a little bit more specific feedback of, trumpets, I don't feel like that was the right color for this moment. Whatever your volume was, I didn't really appreciate the result because of the color you were using. That might be a more constructive comment and make your trumpet players, instead of just being like, oh darn, and really pull back and try and play in a meek manner or play weakly. That's never going to end well. That always just sounding even worse than you started. Instead of having them do that, they can make a measurable change and be able to still contribute in a way that's hopefully better than the previous rep.
Yeah, and this is really interesting to say. I think you've touched on one of those things that I was really hoping that we would get to in all of these conversations I'm having about all the different instruments is, like, I think it's productive for me standing in front of an ensemble to think, okay, there are liabilities for those trumpet players. It's hard for them to hide. They're sort of out there and they have a lot of responsibility. And I think understanding that, how the instrument works in its role, and as you said, sort of not for the meek, not for the faint of heart, shall we say, I think that's helpful thing to have in your mind when you're standing there looking at those trumpets, because they do have responsibility and it is hard for them to, they're not going to be able to hide.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And I do want to step in there for a second and talk about something really important. And I don't think this is something that's unique to trumpets. I do think that it's something that permeates the entire brass section community. As a director, when you're thinking about who you're going to start on specific instruments or which direction you're going to steer, specific students towards in an instrument family or a specific instrument, we need to be very mindful that it is. I know I just said, yeah, you've got to have that go get it sort of attitude. We need to make sure that we're still promoting diversity in who we put into the section. I in the past, unfortunately, there's been a very just cut and dry, we're going to put all the guys on trumpet and we're going to put all the girls on clarinet. That's something that I'm sure it's pertinent everywhere we see now is having equal representation of who's playing and who's able to do that. And I think sometimes that comes down to a band director doing an instrument petting zoo and saying, all right, Susie, you're going to play this, and Henry, you're going to play that. And we ask a lot of questions in the professional world of, why are we so imbalanced right now? Why is it so hard to get, gender equality within the brass section? And, I think one of the big things that hinders that is, happens 10, 15 years prior with a band director steering their students in the wrong direction. I think anybody can play the trumpet. I think that to play it just, it's like learning anything that you do in your life. If you're going to be a sprinter, you just need to know that it's going to take a lot of sweat and a lot of work, and you're going to have to spend a lot of energy on it. I think it's the same for trumpet. You're going to have to dedicate a lot of time, a lot of practice, and the nature of the parts that you play, you're going to probably have to be able to put your heart on your sleeve and go for it. But I don't think that we should count anybody out of that equation when they're a fifth grader. I think that's something honestly, a student will figure out for themselves much further down the line. They'll be like, you know what, this whole going out and standing in front of a crowd and being the melody may not be for me. That's a decision that should solely be left up to the student. And I think that we should empower everyone and anyone to start and to try, and wherever they end up, that's their decision and their journey.
Sure. We're all drawn to a different instrument. Let's make sure those opportunities are equal for everyone. I like that a lot. Okay. Any other points you wanted to make for instructors to think about trumpets?
Yes. I think and I know this is similar for other instruments, but it bears saying again for our trumpet players. When you start having students that are getting into those top ensembles, so we're talking about, maybe the top band, maybe the second band at a big high school, or maybe an honor band, or maybe you're working with a brass quintet that's going to go to state for solo and ensemble, something like that. it's very important for those students and all students to have an education about the tuning of the trumpet. Yes, there's the big tuning slide on the end. Yes, you're sharp or you're flat. That's going to get you in the ballpark, but the mechanics of a trumpet are not perfect. And I know there's many instrument manufacturers that are just sweating away trying to get there. But the physics of the way the trumpet works, the use of the overtone series, and the use of our valves, it creates a pattern that generally gets us in the right ballpark for tuning. But there are tuning tendencies for every single note on the trumpet. If you were to just naturally play perfectly right in the middle of where the trumpet wants to play it, most of the notes are not going to be right on the dial. And so I think, there's, if you're a band director and you've taught beginning trumpet players before, there's the obvious, all right, low D, you're going to kick out. Low C sharp, you're going to kick out even more. And usually we just leave it at that. Those are the most noticeable instances of this. But there are so many other notes where that's also something that you would want to adjust. Maybe it's not quite as severe, but when you're talking about, going to state with your brass quintet, or you're talking about trying to get into the all-state band, or you're trying to have a fantastic solo performance, the attention to detail in those small tuning tendencies starts to make a big difference. And across your brass section as well, I think a lot of like high school bands and middle school bands might look up to drum corps for, being able to play in tune with a really full sound and do a lot of stuff. I know there's a lot of that's modeled off of the ability that the drum corps have. The drum corps focus on that hours a day, all the time. They're always focused on, is this specific person, kicking out this much with their trigger, and are we listening to each other? Are we being very, very open to hearing what other people are doing around, and are we adjusting? I think the sooner we can get students to do that, the better. And it doesn't have to start with like, all right, my 7th grade Vanessa, you are 3 cents sharp. I need you to adjust your, we don't have to go into that level of detail right away. Maybe it's as simple as, hey, listen to your neighbor and make sure that we are playing at the same volume together. We start there and we build it, but I think it's really important to continue building that idea of fine detail tuning, using not just your embouchure to adjust your intonation, but use your slides. Make sure that they all work. Those little things, when done in a way that creates kind of a habit across your whole band, or a culture of sort of being obsessed over these little details, over time, that makes a huge difference in how your trumpet section sounds.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. Good point. I like that. All right, good. Anything else?
One thing that's really easy to do, and I've talked about this with my fellow players that I'm gigging with, and also with band directors that I've worked with. It's something that somebody will bring up, and it's like, oh, that's such a good idea. That would work so well. And then nobody ever has the time to end up doing it. Is creating a library of sound examples of really stellar, exemplary trumpet playing that can easily be accessed and shown to those students. When I like to compare trumpet a lot of times to playing sports, and I know, when I first saw somebody playing golf, and I was, probably still very, very young, it was like, okay, you take the stick, you swing it, you hit the ball, and it goes in. And that's your concept of how golf works. I think trumpet playing a lot of times can be sort of the same thing. It's like, oh, you put the thing up, you blow in it, it makes sound, and you're in marching band. Congratulations. I think, unfortunately, sometimes the attention to detail can stop there. When, however, you see really excellent people play, you see, in the sports world, you see LeBron James make an insane layup, or, you see something in track and field where they're doing this crazy physical thing that obviously takes so much, like a high jump or something. There's so much detail in the what they're doing. By watching somebody that's a real professional doing that, there's just a lot of that will naturally get ingrained, or at least get the brain moving and thinking about, oh, I didn't realize something could sound like that, or sound that good, or sound so different than what I'm used to. Taking just, 20 minutes during summer break to go on YouTube if you're not a native, trumpet player or brass player, and start looking up certain things, or honestly calling a colleague. Everybody that's in the music world that's gone through, music school or anything like that will easily be able to rattle off 20 or more different amazing examples of their respective instrument that they know of because they spent years studying it in school. If you ask a fellow band director or a local professional or somebody with your local symphony or at your closest community college or university, one phone call to that professor or professional or friend can easily get you as many examples as you want of completely fantastic playing on whatever that instrument is. And if you took just a tiny portion of your day in the summer or in a time when, I know the band world's very busy all the time, but when you have just this much time, sending out a blast email to your the 15 people that that play those different instruments, and just saying, reply all, hey, I would love to know your favorite examples of playing that I can show my students. Can you give me 10? Anything works. And then putting that just in a giant Google Doc or something if you want to get fancier. But something as simple as that for your students to be able to access, where you can say, hey, band, today while we wait, while we're all in the band room waiting for the bus to get here to go to a competition, I want you all to get on your phone, because I know you have it already, go to this Google Doc and listen to 2 or 3 of the examples that are listed in there from all these amazing people. And, there may be the occasional student where that's just going to go right over, or maybe they're just not going to care enough to look at it. But I think the majority of students, by observing that and having that be just a part of the ether of their existence in band, they're going to absorb that. And whether that is reflected in their playing right away, who knows? But I know that that's going to stick with them up here and give them ideas of how to be a better player in the future.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. I used to make sure and play some music with great sounds for my band class every day. It's just, they need to know what's possible, and hearing those performances of a really great sound, you have to know what you're going for, right, before you can try to mimic it and get that sound yourself. So I love that point. It's great. Everybody needs to make sure their students are listening to great examples of what it sounds like on their instrument.
Absolutely.
It's really good. All right, Ben, I loved all of this. Is there anything we didn't get to?
I'm thinking here, and probably the last thing I would look at, and this is maybe more specific to trumpet players than it is some other instruments, but trumpet playing, I started today talking about how we're part of the instrument as a trumpet player. Your body is part of that sound-making machine. Because of that fact, trumpet players and really brass players are all completely unique instruments, because when you combine the trumpet, maybe your band is very fortunate and it has all of the exact same model of trumpet. When you put that together with your mix of students, you still have that many different trumpet players out there and that many different instruments when you combine the human element. And so I think it's really, really crucial that we recognize that one of the hardest things about teaching trumpet is that they're individuals. They're so needing to be catered to for their specific issues. There are some things in the trumpet world that are very easily just send out the broad information and everybody's going to get a little better. There's plenty of that for sure. But there's also a lot of things where if you say the exact same thing, 2 different people, they're going to have very different results. And that's because they're different human beings. They've got a different embouchure. They've got a different face. They're a different size. Their dental structure is different. Their tongue size. There's so many variables in there that they all need to have a little bit of individual analysis. Again, that's why homogeneous classes or a master class, or really, if you can get your students signed up in any sort of a private lesson situation, and having that very specified input for their specific issues. That's something that definitely should not be overlooked, because although it would be nice, there's no just Word document that you can tell your whole section and they'll just all know how to play correctly. It's going to need some tinkering and catering to those individuals because they're part of the instrument.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to say it. It's phrased differently than maybe I've ever heard that, but it's a great case for why they need individual instruction and private lesson instruction, because like you said, they're part of the instrument. It's a very interesting way to say that. I like that a lot. So now I'm going to ask you my final question for you, and you've sort of said this already in a whole bunch of different ways, so I'm still going to ask you to answer it. Why do you love the trumpet? Why do you love playing the trumpet? What about trumpet, Ben? Why?
That's a great question. I think my gut reaction is just to say because it's awesome, and maybe that's my trumpet ego coming through. It definitely is my trumpet ego coming through. But I think back to when I was a kid before I played trumpet. I heard actually a lot of synthesizer in music. That was sort of this quasi trumpet synthesized sound, and I just nerded out over it. I was like a hardcore dork over all of that. It's kind of synthesized, brass sound, and the kind of power that it had, and the, I guess, epicness that it would inspire. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. That's mine. I need to do that. That is what gets me out of bed in the morning. And to a degree, I think about what I do now. There's so many more facets to being a professional musician than just playing your instrument. Unfortunately. But, it's like life. It gets more complicated as you go along. But if I'm thinking back to what still really makes me happy, it's when I'm playing in an ensemble, playing with the brass section, and we're just in there sounding awesome. Hopefully we've had an amazing composer write some fantastic music for us, and when we're all in there together and the conductor's really getting into it and we're getting into it and we're listening to each other, and especially when we're playing well together, when we really are trying our best, there's just no better feeling. It's totally awesome. And I don't think I'm unique in saying that. I think many people from many sections will probably say the same thing.
Absolutely, but I love that you used the word epic in the middle of all that, because I think that's a very trumpety thing to say, and I think I love that answer. It was great, and of course you have to love. You're a professional trumpet player. Of course, you think it's awesome and you love doing it, and I appreciate you sharing that perspective on it. Thank you for sharing this information. All the trumpet players hopefully will be happy that their instructors will have heard this and think about that and how they can help them even more. So Ben, thank you so much for talking with me.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Make sure you watch for all the releases in this series, and we hope you'll subscribe here at YouTube so that you don't miss a single release. Thank you for watching.
Marching Arts Education is the home of the Marching Roundtable podcast. We give you access to the top marching arts professionals through live webinars, podcasts, videos, interviews, and online coursework. With over 1,000 podcasts and hundreds of webinars and videos, there are hours of great professional development for you and your staff. Sign up for a membership to Marching Arts Education to get complete access to all webinars, videos, and podcasts, plus discounts on coursework. Many directors are using professional development funds through their school or boosters to make these resources available to their staff. Imagine what you could do with so many great new ideas from the top professionals in our activity. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for our newsletter to find out about the latest podcasts, webinars, and new content. Find all of this and sign up at marchingartseducation.com.